The following is a local resident producers program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Access Television, the City of Oshkosh, the Oshkosh Cable Television Advisory Commission, or Time Warner Cable.
Hi, and welcome to Eye on Oshkosh. I'm Cheryl Hentz, along with former Oshkosh Mayor and City Councilwoman Melanie Bloechl. On this edition of Eye on Oshkosh, our guests are Winnebago County Executive Jane Vandehei, welcome, and County Board Supervisor Tom Widener. Now, Tom, you're also on the Parkview Committee, correct?
That is correct.
Is that the correct name of it, the Parkview Committee? Okay, all right, and you're the chair of that committee?
That is correct.
Okay, well, thank you both for being here this evening. Certainly we want to talk about some of the things going on with Parkview. There's been a lot about Parkview in the news lately, and we'll get to some of the proposals that you folks are looking at, but one of the things that we want to just get to right off the bat is you guys have really come under pressure and fire lately.
Lately, she's saying lately, that's good. Lately we have.
Yes.
Not before, but just now. Just recently, new fire. Yeah.
And Tom, your committee in particular, and what the fire has been about is the way the agenda was worded when it came to discussing the possible sale or closure of Parkview Health Center. It was cloaked as strategic planning, and I think a lot of people felt that that was probably less than forthcoming and rather disingenuous, and you guys have taken a beating from a lot of people, and I don't know, maybe rightfully so in some respects. I think it probably could have been worded a little differently, but how did it get worded the way it was worded?
Should I help you? Because it just makes me so angry, and you're an honorable guy. Since we're doing the season of, kind of gotcha politics, Tom's been using the phrase strategic planning for a very, very long time. People have been invited to those meetings. I don't know, it seems to me the former administrator of Parkview used the phrase strategic planning frequently and often, saying we didn't have any. So the fact that Tom is doing strategic planning, I'm thinking that's a good thing. Now, we didn't write it, he didn't write it, in crayon, saying strategic planning means we're doing our budget for 2004 that the exec makes us do, or we're looking at preparing a document for the capital improvement plan. But it just doesn't seem all that cryptic to me. Fact of the matter is, no reporter ever attended those Parkview meetings ever. I'm glad that the concern over the agenda's gotten attention, because we'd never had a reporter before, and now at least the issues associated with us losing $1.5 million in intergovernmental transfer funds and losing consistently state dollars, at least that's getting attention. So if in fact it was something that caused a stir, at least it's getting the kind of media attention and coverage that it should have gotten right along. And I did. I called the editors, and they said, well, that's terrible. That's terrible. We're going to do something. If there's a criminal problem, pursue it criminally. If not, then quit slandering people and saying they're being deceitful, because I'll be happy with the legal ruling on it.
Well, is that the point? Are
Right.
people saying that this was criminal? I mean, I think that personally, I feel that it could have and should have been worded differently. As a member of the media, I know that we get agenda after agenda after agenda, and you can't possibly
Right.
attend every meeting. You have to go down the agenda and look at the items and say, well, this has significant community impact, or this doesn't. And
Well,
then
except
you
there's a
make your
danger.
choices.
There's a danger with that, though. Then, if I'm your friend, if you like me a lot, you're a reporter, what friends we are, then I can just call you and say, boy, I'd like you to cover this agenda item, or I think this would be good, cover this one. And it gives, I think, elected people then, too much power. If I call you and say, don't worry about any agenda items except my favorite one, you shouldn't be relying on us to evaluate what's important. You should be evaluating what's important for the public and not be trusting any government to tell you what things are important to the people in your neighborhood. That isn't something you should count on us for.
I think Tom wants to jump in
Sure.
here,
Yeah.
being the chair.
I would take exception to your comment. You talk about cloaking, the agenda. When you comment that, we had no intention whatsoever of that. We have used the strategic planning for a long time, and it's an umbrella if something comes up to do that. Our minutes are available if people are interested. Agreeing with Jane, I don't think we have to lead anybody by the nose to come to our meetings. There was no intent whatsoever to do that. I think we had a personal agenda that got involved in that, which made that worse than it could have been. But no, I feel we did nothing wrong whatsoever.
What personal, I'm sorry, go ahead.
When I know that the city also has put things under strategic planning, it was Parkview the singular issue that you were discussing under the MISE of strategic planning, or were there multiple issues that were kind of folded in to the strategic planning umbrella? Was
Well, we were
Parkview
talking primarily Parkview.
Okay, so I guess what I'm wondering is if it's just Parkview, would there have been any harm in saying strategic planning for Parkview? And maybe
But it was the Parkview agenda.
It's a Parkview
so.
agenda.
It was.
The
So
top
what
said
you're
Parkview.
saying is that this committee meets separate from any other committee.
Correct.
Right.
It is solely its own source. You're the chair. It's not folded into any other kind of committee discussing anything else.
Only does Parkview.
So when you have a Parkview meeting and the agenda says Parkview, and on that agenda it says strategic planning, you know full well that it has to do with Parkview.
You should.
Right.
I think that there's some confusion with the general public then, because the way that it was presented, even to me, and I've been on the council where we cover a multitude of issues that are relevant to the city and the local taxpayers. When we say strategic planning, it can mean a multitude of things. So the way that the Northwestern presented this, I think people got the idea that maybe you could have been talking about a lot of other kind of county issues rather than just Parkview.
And
Well-
if they addressed it that way, we really can't do much about that.
Exactly, but I think that maybe is where some of the miscommunication and the perception by the general public is that, maybe the county's trying to pull a funny here, but the way that you've just explained it to me seems very clear. We're having a Parkview meeting. It's a singular committee, and it talks about strategic planning. Under that strategic planning, did you enumerate that the closure or sale or any of those things, was there like an ABC under strategic planning, or nothing like that?
Not until we got to the point where we were really starting to get some numbers and stuff together. When we did our initial discussions, it was basically saying, okay, what should we be looking at? We did no discussion as to the numbers and so forth. Once we got to that point, we did have a meeting in which we listed exactly what we were talking about.
Okay. So at the initial meeting where strategic planning seems to be the issue at hand, this was more of a ferreting out, getting information, collecting data, sharing it with other committee member type things?
Well, actually, what happened is we talked at the committee level, and we talked about the various things we want to do. The study per se that everyone's excited about was an administrative study. It was not a Parkview study.
Right.
And the administrative studies fall within the open
Right.
meetings law. And this was done by the executive and some of her people with input from the committee. The plan being that they would report back to the committee, in which we determine, okay, which way do we want to go? Strategic planning, many times we would not have a thing on it. We'd come down the list, okay, topics for the next meeting, strategic planning, no, we have nothing today, and we move on. If it's not on the agenda, however,
You can't
we
even
can't
discuss
talk
that.
about it, so we leave it there. I think that what happened is people got excited about the closure thing.
Right,
It
right.
was not about the fact that we didn't have an open meeting situation. It was about all of a sudden people are saying you're going to close Parkview.
Sure.
And there was never an intention to close Parkview, but to look at the alternatives, one alternative had to be closing Parkview.
And you have to talk
Who
about
would not
it.
look at that?
And you have to, because if you're going to put everything out on the table,
Right.
it's kind of like when we cut services. Everything has to be out on the table so that rational well thought out decisions can be made, and closure is one of the things that has to be on the table. Now, once everybody decides that's not where you want to go, that's fine, but it's got to be part of the process
Well,
in
but
the
what
discussion.
made us so angry with the gotcha stuff, I wasn't concerned about the open meetings because I know that Tom is an honorable guy. He's an engineer. He gets paid almost nothing to do the supervisor stuff. He has nothing to hide. There is no gain in him doing that. None. But what I really was offended and finally actually even called the paper and was angry. There was a headline that said, possible closure of Parkview. Well, I've had my staff look at those numbers. First of all, you can't sell Parkview because for-profit nursing homes won't buy something that has very, very poor, frail, last resort people in it. There's no money in it. So we can't sell it. We can't close it because by state law we're responsible to take care of those people. So to send them to different facilities would cost the county $9 million a year. Now you're right, we needed to look at it, but to have a headline that says it's closing, and the
Fear-mongering?
story didn't match, and now I've got 3 days worth of patients and families crying because this is their home,
Sure.
because of a choice of words that says closure instead of a choice of words that says can't close, no one in the private sector would buy this. I think that that is irresponsible journalism, and I did put my money where my mouth is. I didn't, just fester about it. I called Stu Rickman and said, this is unprofessional.
When you're talking about Parkview, there's Parkview and then there's Pleasant Acres.
Okay, Parkview has the pavilion and Pleasant Acres. Okay, the
Okay.
pavilion primarily is for those harder to care for.
Okay.
The pavilion would be more like the Normandy nursing home, but it also has some of the people that are harder to take care of. So it's two separate buildings. We have 3 different licenses. We have those 2 licenses, plus we have what we call the ICF-MR, intermediate care facility for mentally retarded. So we have 3 separate licenses in 2 buildings.
Now, when you talk about, when you were discussing strategic planning, was it specifically just for the Parkview Center, or did that include the pavilion and
Parkview is made up of the
all the 3 entities?
right.
So when you talk Parkview, it also falls under this umbrella of multiple
That is
buildings?
correct. That is
Okay.
correct.
And that again gets very confusing for people because I think they think of Parkview proper rather than, that it's being made up of multiple buildings.
You think of the main building as you drive into the parking lot. I think.
Exactly.
If we can just go back to this, I don't want to beat a dead horse, and the horse is out of the barn here. But, rather than thinking just about leading the media by the nose, it's also, I think, a lot of the public was up in arms, family members and
Well, they were up in
You know,
arms
what
because the
have you.
headline said their home was
but-
closing.
Sure.
They weren't up in arms at Tom. They come to those
Well-
meetings
Right,
frequently.
I understand. But if the agenda item had maybe been worded a little differently, perhaps some folks would have come to the meeting and they would have known then that the headline was blown out of proportion.
Well, the
I mean,
fact
is
is that the
fair,
following
or-
meeting, we had a lot of people who spent, there were 50 people who spent forever, and union representatives saying, the newspaper says you're liars and rats and weasels and closing our nursing home. We don't believe them. Tell us what you are doing. And it was very clear to the people that showed up. And of course, the paper regretted that they don't have enough staff these days, in the days of downsizing and major corporate decisions.
No one does.
To cover,
Actually-
to cover us effectively.
Actually, during the meeting, the union representative got up and said, we know exactly what you were doing. We've been covered.
Right.
I stood up on the board floor and talked
Right.
about the fact we were doing this study on the board floor. We had in the newsletter for Parkview, which goes out to the families and goes to, we talked about we were doing this study, we listed what we were looking at. So this was not a big secret.
Right.
The big issue was all of a sudden the headline said,
Right.
Mole's closing.
Which
the fact
was
that we were
false.
doing it was not a secret,
Right.
to the families and the people there.
Right.
We get, up until this time, we have probably had 2 visitors, maybe 3, in the last 5 years that I've been on the Parkview Committee. People don't come. People do not come until you get a specific issue. Now, obviously, it's an issue. We have tried to lay the closing the Parkview to rest. We're now at the point of saying, okay, we got 2 alternatives. Leave it the same. They call that the status quo, which means all we would do at Parkview would be to maintain it to the point so that people are as safe as they are now and they're as comfortable as they are. We'd make no improvements. The idea of going to a new facility means that we maintain our good care. which we really do have at Parkview. It
Yeah.
makes it
5
sometimes
stars, 0 citations.
sometimes it's difficult when we talk about we need to put in a new facility. People will say, but you're getting the 5 stars, you're getting the surveyors come in, you get good, and so but the fact is that we've got a facility that is old. We've got some things that are happening there that are not good, not to the safety of our residents, but we do have some situations where it could be a little bit of the safety of our staff. For example, we have in the very small rooms, 2 people per room. We cannot get a weightlifting device in there,
Hoyer lifts.
which means that when
Yeah.
we're trying to get in there and lift somebody out, we have to do it with personnel. We have to move them into bathrooms that are very small, trying to do the same thing. So it's a staff and a resident situation. We've also found that in the new facilities that the use of medicine, is not required as much because the people are happier, get around much. The incidents that we have in the facilities go down. So going to a new facility, which we can do for less money than we can keep the existing one, just makes all the sense in the world. To me, it's a slam dunk.
Well, I have a couple of questions to that end. First of all, Jane, just to you, when you were first talking about this, one of the things that I think the general public, unless you've been in healthcare, really does not understand is there are laws, the state and federal government, who play a big part in determining what quality, caliber of care, what you must do, when you must do it. You spoke of losing a goodly share of money that helps fund a facility of this nature. Where is that money being taken from? Is that the feds or is that the state?
That's the Fed. We talked about this in the past. Intergovernmental transfer funds were created. They're federal funds to offset the cost of individuals in nursing homes. Not only ours, but a variety of them. That's the money that the Wisconsin Counties Association had been trying to get more to make the cost we receive equal to what it costs to fund.
take care. Yeah.
Last year, 2 years ago, when McCallum was the governor, the Fed, Cole and Feingold and the guys, had some reviews of those IGT funds from the Fed to nursing homes, and what they found in some states that it was being used for other things. In the state of New Jersey, they were using IGT funds for road projects. And so they went through all of the states to see what the track was, where the money went. Wisconsin had not documented as clearly as they might have exactly where the money went. And so with Governor McCallum, I believe he settled for $600 million in money that he gave back to the Fed because they didn't have a good trail of where the money went.
So the state was not tracking the federal dollars going to you.
Right.
So therefore they were penalized, and now these very people who are in need of nursing home facilities are actually, it's the trickle-down effect. They will be being penalized because these
and now the Fed, and now the Fed is saying, you know what, Herb Cole came up with this originally, you know what, we can't track it. We're hoping it's being used well, but we aren't comfortable with it, so they're eliminating the intergovernmental transfer funds for this function. So, and that's the money that we will, maybe over 2 years, large amount of money that offsets Parkview's cost.
And you're talking probably in the next 2 years of losing, did you say $1 million? $1.5
million is the projection.
$1.5 million.
Right.
How will you make that up?
Yeah.
Well, I guess this is why we're so anxious for the
Sure.
public hearings. Matter of fact, in the face of full disclosure, July 7th, we're having a meeting at Coghlan. I don't know whether it will be attended. I would hope so. I don't know if it'll be covered by the media. Also, I would hope so. But it is our 5-year capital improvement plan. I have one each year, and it's really poorly attended. But it will discuss exactly that. Parkview structures, airport structures, revenue sharing. We're talking about losing 7% of our revenue sharing, freezing the levy. Now you know that means that's not the rate, that means freezing the levy with an undisclosed revenue sharing cut and the $1.5 million at Parkview. So I am more than happy. We had a meeting the other night at associated with Parkview Tom had, and it was so nice to hear from citizens. You know, Tom and I are pretty sharp. We are. But factually, there are families and physicians and folks in the community that really need to give some input now because something, you're right, will not be funded.
Well, they need to
something
speak
will
up
not
because
be
government
funded.
needs some support from the
Right.
taxpayers.
Right.
You
Something
don't
will
operate
go
in a
away.
vacuum.
Right.
Right.
Especially if they don't
Right.
like what you're doing. You know, you
Well,
never
and
get
we've
to
had
hear about
open
it until after
doors,
the
and we invite
yeah.
people, but now, and it isn't such a big draw now, honestly, things will change. Standard of living,
Right.
job losses, we've lost 3,000 jobs in the last year in our valley. You know, these are different times. If there's ever a time for people to really be involved in advocating for their family member, or for law enforcement, or for the Reach Center, or for the airport. Now is when that has to be done, because frankly, with a limited amount of dollars, there will be some things that simply aren't funded, and we need to know exactly what's important to the people of our community.
Jane, when is that meeting?
July 7th at 7 p.m.
7 p.m.
at the Coughlin Building.
Okay, we'll get that on the website.
Good.
You know, speaking of the you know, the proposal for a new facility out there versus maintaining what is currently there. There are 239 beds at Parkview right now.
Correct.
239 patients, right.
No,
Okay.
239 beds.
235 patients.
Okay, fight nice, guys.
I actually like him. I would. Yeah.
239 beds.
Right.
Okay. And the projections, if you build new, are for 175 to 200 beds?
That is
According
correct.
to the paper, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Why the downsizing when we've got an aging population, and where will those, you know, those other patients go?
Can I do
Where-
this? You
No,
want it.
let me do this one.
Okay.
fine. Okay, fine.
Basically, what's happening, two things are happening. People are in better shape than they used to be.
Okay.
You know, so people are taking better care of themselves. So people are living longer in their own homes because they are in better health. So, okay, they can, instead of going into a nursing home and pick a number at 65, they may go in at 75 or at 80. The state is also pushing for putting people in the least restrictive situation they can be in, which is essentially be in the community, either in their own homes or in a
CBRF.
CBRF, community-based residential facility, aging facility, and they're trying to get more of that. Now, we don't have very much of that right now. So theoretically, if we said, okay, we're going to cut back at Parkview, there are not places to put them. But the fact they're doing that and saying we want to do more of that, that's going to also reduce the number of people that need to go to nursing home. Now, one of the reasons we want to retain Parkview is there are situations where you just can't stay in the community. You have to be out
Right.
there. The other thing that we're seeing is that the fact that the amount of time people stay in nursing homes is a lot less than it used to be. You know, people come in a nursing home and maybe stay there for years. Well, now a lot of people are coming in to get well, and they're in the nursing home for a while, and then they're gone. So we're finding that the same number of beds will take care of more people. The 175 versus 200, we're not sure. You know,
Somewhere in that range.
Yeah, in that range. Outagamie County went from like 259 to 200. One of the reasons they went there was the lack of nurses. You know, use contract nurses, which we do. Now, we've been fortunate lately that we haven't had to use as many nurses, contract nurses, in the past. But that was one of the reasons that Outagamie County said, okay, we're going to go from 259 down to 204, because we just don't have the nurses out there to take care of the people, which gives you the other problem.
Sure.
We're saying, okay, I build it for 250, but I only got nurses for 200, and we do pay for those beds. You know, there's two things going on right now. We got to be to a certain percentage to get state funds, so we can be like at 95% full. So we can't just have a bunch of empty beds. The other thing they're talking about doing is a bed tax. And presently, we pay a bed tax of, I think, and I may be wrong on the number, $35 or something per bed for occupied beds. They want to change that to like $139 per bed for licensed beds. The idea being saying, do not have extra beds. The state wants us to cut back on the number of beds in nursing homes.
Explain that if you would, because I've never heard of a bed tax.
Yeah, okay.
Have you? And you've worked in healthcare.
And if you
What-
need
what-
to come to spend some time.
Wow.
What is
It
that?
is very, very, very complicated. As a matter of fact, the consultant that Tom brought in a year ago that was under strategic planning was a specialist who talked in terms of the trends, in terms of aging. The state is encouraging nursing homes, counties not to be in the nursing home business. And they do some formulas and they do some chargebacks. And yeah, tell about the bed tax. I like that one.
Okay, basically, and I'll have the numbers wrong on the existing one, but the existing bed tax for the regular nursing home is probably in the neighborhood of $39, and don't quote me on the number. Then we
And
have
is
our
that per month, Tom, or?
per month.
Okay, all right.
And it's for occupied beds. Okay. We also have what we call the ICFMR, the Intermediate Care Facility for Mentally Retarded. Okay, that's in the same neighborhood. What they're doing is they're trying to phase out that and put those people in the community. So they're going to raise that to something like $438 per month per licensed bed. Now, they're closing what they call the Northern Center, which is for the developmentally disabled, very developmentally disabled people. They're trying to bring them back in the community. The whole thing is trying to get people in the community, which I happen to agree with. Now, I also serve on the Human Services Committee, and I normally am able to get some money, except for the Wicked Witch of the West.
That would be me. We're friends. Yes, I'm cheap. That's good.
Trying to get more money. We have about 440 people on the waiting list right now, which is up 100 from the beginning of the year. These are people that can stay in their own homes if they can get some help. You know, and so we pay for people to come in. Maybe something just as simple as helping them get dressed in the morning. You know, taking care of their getting washed up and that type of thing. If we can keep it, if we can't, they get to a point where they can go nowhere but to a nursing home. So we're trying to balance the in the community with the nursing home.
But would it not be, I don't know, smarter and more humane, I guess, to for the state or the feds, whoever sets this bed tax, to find alternative ways, maybe changing the criteria with which people can get into a nursing home facility, rather than raising the tax by a few $100s a month and making it cost prohibitive for some people?
Well, what we're actually looking at, there's been a committee put together one time looking at how do you take care of people in the communities. Because what happens now is the state will give us some number of funds to take care of people in the community, and we have to match like 10% of that. So they gave us $1 million, we got to put in $100,000.
Community option cop and KIP dollars.
And basically what that would say is that once we do that, we met our commitment. Well, if we still got 400 people on the waiting list, then our option is to take county tax funds and take care of those people. That's called overmatch.
Right.
Okay, so what happens if you're in Winnebago County versus Shawano County, you may be able to be taken care of in the community better in one than the other because they got different standards, they got other places they spend their money. What the study said was the state should establish a level in which you get into you can be taken care of in the community. And then the state will pay for that. Okay. If the state runs out of money, then what they do is they raise the standard.
Right.
And say, therefore, okay, you got in at this level now you get it. But what it does is if you meet the criteria, you're taken care of. It's no more the situation like we have here. Here with the 440, I think Brown County at one time had like 1,500 people on their waiting list. So depending on which county you're in, you get off the waiting list or you don't. So that the plan, if it was ever accepted, was a much better plan. Yeah.
Do we not have people that come from other counties and communities that will come to Winnebago because there are openings or there are services that are available here that are not available in their counties?
That is talked about. People do say that. Right now, our waiting list, at the beginning of last year, our waiting list was about 2 years, assuming we continue to meet. Okay, so if someone's going to come into Winnebago County to get on a waiting list for 2 or 3 years because we're better is pretty doubtful. But it could happen.
The question that I have is CBRFs, or the community-based residential facilities. Are they cost effective? The ones that I have seen in our city that have been done for developmentally disabled, a variety of different resources made available to different people for different reasons. Houses are purchased in residential areas, taken off the tax rolls because, of course, they're state homes, or not-for-profits are purchasing them and running them. And usually, many times, have at least 24-hour care within the facility. Is that a cost-effective way for because you're buying a single-family residential home in a residential area, there are laws that prohibit non-related individuals as to who can live in that home. Is it a cost-effective way to do business for the state?
In some cases, it will cost us more to put somebody in a CBRF than in a nursing home. That is correct.
And depending on what the situation is.
And depending on what kind of care they need. And some people do need 24-hour care. Okay, and that may be more expensive in a CBRF than in a nursing home. It gets back to the least restrictive environment.
Sure.
Well, and I have some insights into this because my mother-in-law's in a CBRF, and so I've spent a lot of time. She was at Parkview, and so I'm pretty familiar. When I was on the State Board of Nursing a few years, 5-8 years ago, CBRFs were just coming into play, and a lot of them are for profit. They are They are companies. Century Oaks is a company, is a organization, and they are for profit. And so the average cost per month is $2,500 or $2,800 a month, and that doesn't include medications and such. They are not required to have medical staff. As a matter of fact, they do a needs assessment, and if a patient has health needs that require a nursing assistant or an RN, they aren't eligible to be admitted there. So it is a living place. They have people that cook food for them and help them with laundry and do things and provide their medications. They're starting to get more regulated. When I was on State Board of Health, there weren't a lot of licensure examination kind of issues, but because they've grown as an industry and they're a profitable industry, now there is more regulation, more reviewing them, looking at them, making sure they meet certain standards. But by definition, a community-based residential facility can't have people that have significant health care needs because they're not staffed by nurses and things. They don't have medical staff on board, and that's on purpose. You know, they're given help with clothes and shoes and food, but you know, once they reach a level where they require health care, by needs assessment, they have to be moved from that facility maybe to a facility that offers a certain level of health care. Parkview is last resort, meaning that their acuity level of needing medical care, you know, feeding tubes and all kinds of stuff, is such that it requires around-the-clock nursing staff, and those also are the patients nobody aggressively pursues. For profits don't,
Because there's no money to be made, because it's very costly
and
to
it's
take
costing
care.
more. Now you have a higher ratio of nurses.
Sure.
Now you have an IV. Now you have a ventilator, and now those aren't people that have a place to go. Those are the ones we talk about as last resort.
Real quickly, because we're talking, and you hate to break down healthcare into the dollars and cents, but unfortunately in government, where the county government is so incredibly responsible for some services that I think people don't really understand. I think that's a big misnomer. I don't think people understand county government and the responsibility that you have. And if they did, I think they'd have a greater appreciation for the work that's being done. When we talk about dollars and cents and critical care issues like Parkview and the like, one of the things that I think has to be mentioned is the reimbursable rate of Medicare. There has not been any changes to the reimbursables. Physicians are screaming about it. Hospitals are screaming about it. Is it a bone of contention for a facility like Parkview as well? I mean, is it hurting you? Because let's face it, the people that you're getting there are really in a situation where they're going to need a higher level of care. Chances are they've run through whatever savings that they've had in and out of other facilities. Now they're coming to a Parkview facility. How does this affect your bottom line?
Well, about 83% of the people we have at Parkview are on Medicaid, and Medicaid does not pay anywhere near what it costs us to have them there, and that's in effect why the county has to subsidize that. Medicare per se does make it for us. You know,
Medicaid does not, but Medicare does.
Medicare does.
And Medicaid is
that's people that have gotten to a certain level of.
It's almost like the kind of like the Title 19. Is it
all
more?
of their resources have been exhausted,
and
they are no longer able to pay for even basic services.
Basically, it's state-funded medical assistance, correct?
Okay. Thank you for saying that, because I wasn't sure how to phrase that.
We knew it was there, Cheryl.
Yes. So Medicaid is really the impetus to breaking the back of county-supported nursing home facilities.
That is correct. If I can go back to the bed tax, we talked about the bed tax.
Yes, please.
Parkview supported the bed tax because the bed tax will pay for getting more money back from medical assistance. And we actually think we'll come out ahead if paying the bed tax and getting money back in medical assistance.
The increased bed tax?
Yes.
Okay.
But so I'm back to this meeting.
Because that's where they get the money for the increased medical care. I'm sorry.
Well, that's confusing to me. I mean, I don't mean to sound stupid here, but you're supporting an increased tax that the state is leveling on you for someone who's already in a bed.
Right.
So how do you come out ahead if you're actually paying now potentially triple what you were paying before for an occupied bed? How do you?
Because we'll get money back on Medicaid, medical assistance.
Capturing federal dollars. It is exactly something you couldn't understand at one meeting that said strategic planning. However, it is a situation where every nickel that we invest, we watch to make sure that we can capture state or federal money, so that when the bed tax increases, larger amount to the Fed, who says, oh yeah, look at exactly what Wisconsin didn't do in tracking the IGT funds. Look, they're paying this much. It's a 60-40 match. It's just like
So they'll
highway
match your dollars due to your expenditures. They're watching your bottom line on how much it's costing you to. Okay.
It's
But
just
Yeah,
the
like
bottom
it's
line is this all
complex.
comes
Yeah.
out of taxpayer pockets.
Well, right.
It's just the
Right.
right pocket, the
Right.
left pocket. It's shuffling money. I mean,
But,
this is
but it's the
ridiculous.
same thing with the highway, but it's the same thing with the DOT projects. We couldn't afford to put any roads. We couldn't build Witzel Ave. We don't have the money.
Right.
But the federal DOT says, okay, Wisconsin, we agree you can have X number of federal DOT dollars that came from citizens all across the country. Okay. So the state government then takes that money and says, okay, let's look at the projects. All right, Winnebago County, Witzel Ave looks like a good road. You've done good work to demonstrate that it isn't safe traffic-wise, etc. Okay, we will approve it. We'll pay 80% if you pay 20%, and we agreed
this
to
is
do
what-
that. And the bottom line is, even though, right, what a system, airport, same thing, what a system. Yep, but the bottom line on it is this, and nobody ever, obviously it gets too complicated to discuss. The bottom line is that Wisconsin is number 68
in getting this
in
money
getting
back.
federal money back to their state to do these projects.
So where are our congressmen?
Well, we've been mentioning it.
Regularly.
I think I have just figured out where we can cut some of our expenses at the state level, and that's get rid of some of these people who sit around all day pushing pencils and figuring up all this
Well, they can use our people.
reimbursable
They can use our
stuff.
people, so they can do it.
But if we spend 40% and get back 60%, then that's
It's a good
pencil.
investment.
Well, sure, it's a good investment, but my
Well,
God,
Greg
I
Underheim
mean,
always calls it funny money, and and it's a shame, and in the
Wow.
big reality check, the big reality of life, even if we call it funny money, the bottom line is Wisconsin
Only is number
is
68.
number 68 out of 72 states getting funny money. So I'm thinking that even if it's funny and we don't like it, probably we should not reject it, and maybe we should solicit, more of it, since Arkansas and Texas and Alabama don't seem to have a problem with funny money.
so it's only slightly comical
Yeah.
rather than funny. I
Well,
guess.
but no, the president now just did the tax cut and such. So it looks like at the federal level, they may be very well agreeing with you that it shouldn't go to them first and come back to us. Although, frankly, I can speak for the county board. I can speak for the county executive. I think you're outside
of the
of
two.
my league. When you want to know about federal stuff, I think you might want to bring some little federal person here to answer your questions.
Congressman Petrie.
That would be great.
Good. We'll write that down and
We'll-
start
yeah,
getting a
we'll
list.
get
But
on that.
Yeah.
just the paperwork alone, the enormous amount of
Right.
paperwork that has to go along with facilitating the tracking of all of this is
sure.
just enormous. And I think this is a good thing that we've, as confusing as it may sound why we're bantering this back and forth, I think this is good that the public hears what
And
you
who
have
would
to
know?
go through.
Right. Who would know that?
Nobody. I'm sitting
No,
here going,
They wouldn't know that.
Good
And you have-
Lord.
well, and the interesting thing that it's an interesting phraseology. For years, Tom's right. They have these community option dollars. When AFDC, Aid for Families with Dependent Children, went away, they came to our board before Tom and I, and they said, this money's going away, and we aren't able to fund then even things like food stamps. So the board collectively said, okay, we're eliminating AFDC, and that's fine because we're going to do that. But we'll put aside a small amount for downright food vouchers, because frankly, in this economic downturn, there are people needing food vouchers who've never needed help,
Right.
who've worked their whole life.
Right.
So they put that money aside, and when there are needs like that, the board has said, we're pretty tough and as stoic as anyone, but if Living Healthy can't, operate and give medication to schizophrenic people, or people don't have food, we will fund that. Well, what happened was over time, the county board's been calling it an overmatch, where they pick up some needs that are simply identified.
being met.
Yep, except Joe Leon, the Secretary of Human Services before this one, he was the first one to change the phrase. And so when we'd say overmatch, he'd say, oh, no, and just spun it around and called it, I don't know,
Discretionary spending.
discretionary spending.
Kind of like it was a
Yeah.
little pot that
Well,
you
we're
could.
thinking, so discretionary funding versus overmatch, pretty clever play on words, but, comes still out of this pocket. Right.
And basically, what it amounted to was the legislature, when we spend the extra money to take care of the people that they aren't taking care of, they're saying, well, that's up to you. That's your discretionary
Right,
spending.
right.
But theoretically, we could come out using my example. Let's say we get $100,000 from the state, which means we got to spend $10,000. If we got to the end of January and it spent our $10,000, we have people that we legally have to take care of. And
Right.
the court says you will take care of them. So it is not discretionary spending.
You
It's
don't
money
get to
that we
determine.
have to spend.
Right. I was just going to say this is not whether or not you want to. Not only that, from a humane standpoint, as a
Right.
human, how could you let your
Are you listening?
I'm listening.
well, there are things that, I think we've spent
I'm
money on
listening.
that I
Yeah,
think are a little, people are pushing
She
a little
always
hard.
cuts my budget. Every year she cuts my budget.
oh, that Grinch that stole Christmas.
One last question. You stated that Parkview was an aging facility. How old is Parkview? Do
Okay,
you
I
know?
think that the pavilion was in the 1950s, and I believe that the Pleasant Acres was 1960s, and I could be off a little bit on that.
And one last question with regard to, you think that building a new Parkview is a slam dunk. I'm paraphrasing,
That's
but
my
that's your
opinion.
statement, your opinion. Where do you get $14 million, question mark on the $14 million, because obviously this is all
Right.
very preliminary. Where do you get $14 million to build new?
Okay,
And
oh, I'm sorry.
when do we want to do this? I mean, what is your
Okay.
goal?
Well,
as far
first we're
as-
having the July 7th meeting so we can hear
Right.
from people, because the competitors will be people who want to build airports and roads. So it's not, it's got to be evaluated against need versus want,
Okay.
which in fact it is.
The study we did basically said that spending the $14 million on a 10-year bond, basically, okay, you got
General obligation bonds?
I assume so.
Yes.
Okay.
I assume so. Paying off that debt with the savings we would make at either the 175 or the 200 bed level, we could pay off the debt and we have less expenses and a reduced revenue depending on how many beds we have. We still come out money ahead because the cost of operating the old facility, both from a labor standpoint and from a utility standpoint, is more than that would be. So the impact to the taxpayer is somewhere in the neighborhood of we go from like 32 million to 40 million in some years. We come out like $400,000 a year ahead with a new facility versus the old facility. And I should have brought my book. I could have
Well,
clipped
yeah,
the numbers.
and
but
this is a 20-year note?
10-year.
10,
10
we
year.
always do 10.
So you
do
guys
10.
always do 10-year notes. So you're saying that you could pay this off in less than 10?
No, we pay it off in 10,
You
but
paid off-
the debt that we're paying each year on
Would
top
more
of our
than accommodate that 10-year note
would be more than,
over the
well,
time?
yeah, the cost of running a new Parkview, including the debt, is less than running the old Parkview. And there would be some debt there because we got some maintenance that has to be done every year type of stuff.
Do you have ADA issues and things like that, with all the new laws and rules and regs coming from the feds and the state, are those issues, and maybe you're not comfortable addressing that because you haven't made the decision as to whether or not you want to go new. So let's just skip that question right now.
All right.
Okay?
Yeah, because back to, so our finance director, Chuck Ornstein, our engineer in charge of buildings, and our administrator at Parkview are the folks who did the original strategic planning at my request, since I'm administration. And then Tom said, gee, could we share and look and such. So the numbers that were made public forever demonstrate exactly what Tom said, that the operational cost with nurses and things is so expensive that if we downsized operational because of efficiencies, it would actually be costing less to the taxpayer to do a building that was more efficient.
Okay.
But
One closing thing, and then let's move on to another
Yeah, 'cause
subject, because
I've
we've
got
just
some other
beaten the
things here.
living crap out of Parkview.
but who's ever going to hear about it if you don't?
Yeah, well, so just to close this segment really quick on Parkview, it's not going to be closed. Parkview, the closing of Parkview off the table, fear-mongering over, we're now moving forward to make a decision as to, rebuild or,
Status
New
quo,
build.
But
Well, status quo, which would be no rebuilding.
okay,
Or build a new building.
okay, so no closure though.
Absolutely.
And
Okay.
no one,
Okay,
no.
okay.
All right, shifting gears. I had some information, we had some information provided to us about the Aviation Committee. And Tom, I know you're on that too, so maybe you can
Not-
speak.
I was on the
You
aviation.
were on the committee, okay.
Yeah.
This goes back about a year and a half. It goes back to a meeting that was held on October 31st of 2001. And the reason that I bring it up, and the reason I think it was provided to me, is because it has been suggested that this committee meeting was an illegal closed meeting. The information that I have shows that it was an all-day long retreat, and these words again, strategic planning retreat.
That wouldn't be my bailiwick. Already.
And yet, according to state statutes, closed meetings can only be held for the purpose of deliberating or negotiating the purchase of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. Now, the stuff that was given to me, and I'm not going to say who gave it to me, but the stuff that was given to me didn't seem to indicate any of those things that would meet state statutes.
What was
What-
the retreat about? I think we have to be a little
Okay.
bit more
Well,
clear
well,
for
let's-
the viewing audience because they're not privy to the documents that you have in front of you.
Well, human resources type stuff, public relations, talking about economic development, land development, customer service. There was a tremendous amount of stuff that was discussed with respect to Orion Flight Services, which has also been in the news in the last 6 to 12 months. Facilitating their successful startup, develop strategic.
Orion's?
Yes, that was it was
That doesn't seem to be
Objective
consistent
number
with what
2.
we've observed in terms of, aren't there gas wars and lawsuits?
Well, a lot of these objectives discussed at this strategic planning retreat had to do with Orion, and then developing master plans and so forth. But the bottom line, I guess, is, how is any of that something that would fall under the allowable use of a closed session meeting? How did this happen?
Okay, let me answer that.
Oh, good, because I'm not on the board,
I was on the committee at that time, and the theory that was there was that we wanted to talk about, in effect, long-range planning. And we felt at the time that because we knew that commercial aviation was going to go away, that we needed to come up with a way of revitalizing the airport. Because presently we got EAA. If we didn't have EAA, we'd be gone. Let's face it. So we said, okay, what can we do to get more people in there? This is the thinking that went into the meetings, including trying to get someone in there that would be a little more active at the airport. Bring people in that would bring more people in, kind of thing. You got something. And so that was the idea of the meetings. I voted against going into closed session each time
Good for you.
because I did not feel that it
Claudia,
was,
is this a man? We're liking him?
I did not feel that we had to go to closed session. Now what we could have gone into was an open session with no input from the public.
Like a workshop.
Yeah, you can sit back
Sure.
and listen to us, but we're not
Right.
going to.
We're not taking comment.
That's
This
right.
is discussion amongst
and
us.
that was my feeling, that we should do that. I think it was a little bit marginal, actually. I mean, it could have fallen in there, and there's several other things you can go into closed session for. It's like 14 items, because I've got it, since I've been involved in that. It
Once
was marginal.
accused, you make sure you know
Well, and-
damn well what they're
and
talking
Tom
about.
is chairman of the Parkview Committee. Who was the chairman of the Aviation Committee then?
It was Mark Nielsen.
Okay, and same other board members, Tom Peck and,
No,
no.
It would have been Klein and me and Dave Albrecht.
And Dave Green, who is deceased now.
Right.
So, and then others present were Duncan Henderson, the airport
Right.
director, and Gary King of Skyworks, which,
Right,
as
the
I
consultant.
understand it, is your consultant, or was your consultant. So was there anything illegal about this? Is it being looked at?
I don't believe there's been ever I don't think there's been a citizen complaint. I don't believe it has there's never been a complaint filed. The way this works, let me clarify. That's why I had such a lively conversation with the newspaper guy. If you believe that something is not right and illegal and such, it is a fairly simple task for Stu Rickman or any citizen, anyone, to pick up the phone. You could call OPD, you could call the DA's office, and you could say, gee, I'm uncomfortable with this meeting thing. Could you review this for us, please? Simple to do, really not difficult. And the AG's office then reviews the situation and says, yes, they were trying to be sneaky, like the newspaper said, or they're not lawyers and they didn't know. But it requires a citizen or someone to file a complaint saying, I believe this is criminal.
So why is it that no one at the county level, because like I said, it's been bandied about with different people in county government. How come nobody did that?
And I can only suggest that maybe they believed, as Tom, that it didn't reach a threshold, although I would have expected, right, since our friends at the media are so very, very careful, I guess I would ask the same question. Why would it not have been explored?
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe it's because the newspaper has friends who are interested in FOBs out at the airport versus what's going on at Parkview. See, and that's my problem is I think some of these things have a
Selective?
personal and selective agenda that's attached to them. Speaking of things that are going on at the airport, this was very bothersome to me when I read this because these are the kinds of things that when I was on the council, I would just, the hair on the back of my neck would raise up and I would be screaming and hooting and hollering because they just, whether they seem to rise to a legal level of impropriety, there is a moral and ethical level that we all, we have to be very careful not to cross that line in the sand. This, I think, crosses the line, and I think it's, from the material that I read, spent way too much time on Orion. It seemed like a singular focus, and that there would, personally for me, looked as though there was an agenda for certain people that wanted to make sure Orion was successful and only Orion, and was spending an awful lot of time. Now maybe I'm reading more into that, but just by virtue of the way this is constructed, it did not look.
We did have
Good.
several meetings, and I mentioned I voted against going in closed session of each of the meetings, so I can't refer to specific to that meeting. I think if we looked at the agenda for all the meetings and what happened, you would not see that.
Okay.
So I cannot say that, and I know that I was a pusher for trying to get someone more dynamic in the airport. What we've got at the airport right now is circle the wagons.
Right.
Yes.
If somebody wants to come in outside, let's keep them out. There's
Well,
no
and
question.
unfortunately, that's far too historic for this area anyway.
Right.
Speaking of that, there was an editorial in the local Northwestern recently, speaking of the newest hangar that was going to be facilitated with the help of Chamco and a local entrepreneur who was interested in building a hangar. Now, I'm not real solid on the lingo, so if I make a mistake here, I know you'll jump in and correct
No problem, because we've made a mistake once or twice, although not in the last 10 years.
But one of the things that I was a little concerned about as I read this editorial about how government should step out of the way and they should have let this entrepreneur just do his thing. The difficulty is in the editorial, there was really no mention of what the original negotiations were with this entrepreneur and the long-term contractual obligations that the county would have, the money that would be exchanging hands, the length of the lease. Now, to tell government to step out of the way when they're in the midst of negotiating what's in the best interest of the county and the taxpayers is a little bit arrogant, I think, without talking about what the original lease agreements were. Because if my understanding is correct, the secondary negotiations or the continuing negotiations certainly put the county and the taxpayers in a much more favorable position than originally would have been established if government would have gotten out of the way.
Okay, I disagree with that.
Okay,
Oh, really?
and I'm glad that you
Which I've
say
told
that.
her. Basically, the original. Well, okay, go ahead.
Oh, and I'm glad to hear you say that because I want, if my numbers and my memory serve me, you're also the only county board supervisor that actually voted against this actual proposal on the county board. And I'd like to know why and what were your issues with this, because
Okay.
I think that's very interesting.
Going back
And
to some.
unfortunately, Tom, we only have 3 minutes.
Oh, God.
Like,
And you were worried that we have a whole hour and what
Very,
would
very,
happen.
very quickly. In some of those meetings we had in the past, we established that 20th Avenue was the area that we wanted to protect. And we said, we need to protect that. We want to use that for people that can come in, bring jobs, bring in more people, that type of thing. This particular proposal was for an airplane garage,
Okay.
taking the most valuable spot on 20th Avenue. Initially, it was right up to the area that we've got leased for Orion, which essentially blocked off anybody else from coming in. So if we wanted to bring somebody else, they could not come in. In some of the negotiations, we had managed to bring this back like two areas back so that there was some space left there. Okay. The other thing they did is they wanted to lease a third of the next plot, pay for the third, and have options on the other two sections. So in effect, they blocked off the entire section. Okay. What they've done now, they've taken away that. Okay. But the entire thing was basically a negotiation on a lease that was put to the county. And there was never any discussion about, is this the best place for us to put it?
Okay, and that's what, I'm so glad to hear you say that, because when you hear about these negotiations, it's actually kind of premature because the master plan for the airport is not complete yet.
Correct.
Is that not correct?
That is
so,
correct.
So we're building these kinds of things in kind of a haphazard way, and a master plan has not been fully developed. And this particular lease, is it a 50-year lease,
It's
Tom?
a 35-year lease with two 10-year options. Now, the county does have the option. One thing they did get back, they do have the option to buy the building at the end of the 25 or at the end of the 10. But a 55-year lease is,
Wasn't that originally what was being proposed?
there really hasn't been an awful lot of change from that original lease.
Wow.
Okay, really hasn't been. And we did some fine tuning in there, but we got, now instead of getting $10,000, we're going to get $11,000 because we kicked up the rate. But we still lost the spot on 20th Avenue. The
Well-
hangar could be anywhere.
And the difficulty that I have, and I'll just wrap up real quickly, the difficulty that I have is when an editorial tells government to get out of the way when it is your, you are
supposed to
elected
protect
to
you,
look
right.
out for us.
Right.
And the Northwestern hesitates to mention that the very man that they're thinking that this is such a great deal with happens to be one of their buds.
Right,
I got a problem with that.
right, right.
All
That's
righty.
right.
Well,
How's that for a little as we end up the show?
Thank you.
Now you have 3 minutes, wait.
No,
you
no,
have
no.
3 minutes left.
No,
and
now we're down to 0.
We're past that, Jane.
Oh.
We're past the 3-minute mark.
Oh, boy.
We're like in about 30
We have
seconds
1
here.
minute left?
No, I don't think so. So anyway, well, I thank you both for being here and
really very
giving us the
informative.
last hour. It's been informative,
Thank you.
and I hope
Yes, thank you,
has
too.
cleared
We,
some things up for some folks. And thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Eye on Oshkosh. We'll see you next time. Keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh. Take care.